On my recent visit to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, I stepped into a world that shaped one of the most skilled painters of the modern era. The exhibit Sargent in Paris brings us into the heart of John Singer Sargent's formative years when he arrived in Paris as a young, ambitious student in 1874 and left a decade later as a painter of a remarkable vision. At this stage, Sargent wasn't yet the celebrity portraitist of high society. He was still learning, experimenting, absorbing, and constantly pushing the boundaries of what paint could do. But even with these early years, you can see it, the flair, the precision, the boldness that would come to define his mature style. This period is particularly important because it's where everything begins. His time in Paris shaped how he saw, how he designed the composition, handled his brush, and explored color. As we walk through the exhibit, I invite you to look closely, not just at the subjects he painted, but more importantly, how he painted them. So we're going to pay attention to the structure of his compositions, the decisiveness of his brushwork, and the subtlety of his color. So this video isn't just about some sort of an art history, although there will be a bit of that. It's a lesson in seeing, in understanding what makes a painting come alive. In this first painting from 1882, The Daughters of Edouard Darley Boit, Sargent breaks all of the rules of traditional portraiture. The square format, the off-center placement, and this deep shadowy space all create a mood that's more psychological than posed. Rather than grouping the girls together, he spreads them across the canvas. The youngest is up front and open, the others recede into the shadows. It's like watching time pass in a single room almost. The composition feels casual, but it's tightly designed. Those large vases or vases act like, I guess, visual anchors, and the negative space, the emptiness between figures is just as important as the figures themselves, it seems. What can we learn from this piece? So firstly, don't fear asymmetry. Use space as a narrative tool, and sometimes mystery is more powerful than clarity. Sargent's design sensibility is just as sharp in his studies of architecture and daily life as in his portraits. Take the staircase in Capri, by the way, one of my favorite pieces of his, certainly the architectural ones. It's a painting about light and shapes as much as setting. Look how the angular shadows carve up the space. The staircase becomes almost abstract, like a stage flattened into a geometric plane. Then we see two girls on a balcony, also in Capri. Similar setting, but now there's a soft narrative. The girls are small in the frame, almost secondary to the architecture. He places them high and to the side, using negative space and open air to give the composition room to breathe. In both of these works, the architecture does the heavy lifting. It's a lesson in restraint, really. So what he's saying is, indirectly of course, let the environment guide your design and don't overcrowd the canvas. Sometimes simplicity in layout makes the subject feel more real and more grounded. And lastly, with respects to design and composition, let's look at this piece called Incensing the Veil. Sargent reduces the scene to its essentials, really. Soft whites, gentle grays, and just enough contrast to suggest form. The composition is vertically weighted and serene, almost abstract in how it flattens the space. The figure disappears into the haze. unified with the veil and the smoke. It's quiet, sacred, and intentionally minimal. This piece reminds us design doesn't always mean complexity. Sometimes clarity of tone and simplicity of shape say more than details ever could. Before we dive into Sargent's brushwork, I wanted to throw a bit of a curveball. This is the bath at Javilla, painted by the famous Spanish master Joaquin Sorolla in 1905, just a few decades after Sargent's formative years in Paris. It's wild, luminous, and explosive with color. Sorolla's strokes are sun-soaked and instinctive. You can feel the speed and confidence of his hand that made them. So it's a great contrast to Sargent. Both artists painted directly from life, both had immense technical skill, but where Sorolla chased light and spontaneity with broad, kinetic movement, Sargent is more surgical, more controlled. Every stroke is, I guess, deliberate, even when it looks casual or simple. Now let's shift from Sorolla's blazing light to Sargent's quieter precision with this piece called Paul Helleu Sketching with His Wife. Hopefully I'm pronouncing some of these names correctly. This was painted in 1889 and it shows Sargent's close friend reclining in grass, sketching as his wife lies beside him. Unlike Sorolla's thick impastos, Sargent works with restraint. If you look at the grass, barely described, just flicks of brush, the dress of the ladies rendered with quick, transparent strokes, but it holds weight and presence. Nothing is overbuilt. What's striking is how much he leaves out. There's no fuss, no revision. His brushwork here is about confidence, knowing exactly what to say and how little you need to say it. And that's what makes it feel effortless, even though it's anything but. This next piece was almost like a starstruck moment for me. I mean, a lot of these pieces, you study, and if you're an art geek like me, you have in the back of your mind somewhere. But when you see it up close and in real life, it's just mesmerizing. This is Setting Out to Fish, painted in 1878. I mean, when you consider this guy was only 22 when you painted this absolute masterpiece. It's early Sargent, but you already see the magic in his brushwork. The scene feels completely unforced. The women walking into soft light, their garments flickering with movement. What makes this one so striking is how suggestive the strokes are. The foreground is barely touched, just enough to ground the figures, and the path they walk on, it's almost abstract, built from warm and cool temperatures rather than detailed drawings. But the real show is in the fabric. Those white dresses and the blue-brown dresses aren't painted as white or blue or brown. They're patchwork of reflections, blue sky, golden earth, even tints of green. His brush never lingers. He makes the marks and then moves on. It's that confidence of knowing how not to overpaint that gives the whole scene its life. I've chosen to also include this piece, which he created as a study for Setting Out to Fish, and in many ways it's a window into his process. Here you can see the brushwork more raw and I guess more exposed. The single figure stands alone, but what I wanted you to pay attention to is not only the rhythm and elegance that define, of course, the final piece through this study. I want you to pay attention to the layering, the thin washes in the shadow areas and the thicker opaque strokes that are catching the light. So this is somewhat indicative of his work and many artists before and after him. The dress is built up loosely, yet it carries volume. His marks aren't blended to death. They're placed with care and left visible. So thin shadows and thick lights. We'll explore that concept further with this next example. One of the best examples of Sargent's technique where thick light meets thin shadows is this piece, Among the Olive Trees, also in Capri, Italy. The figure leans quietly in this landscape, but it's how she's painted, and of course the design is what draws you in. If you look closely, her face and blouse catch the light, and those are the areas that are handled with thicker paint and pastos being built up here, just enough to reflect more light off of the canvas. But the shadows, they're almost glazed, thin, transparent, barely even there. And the background trees and the grasses here are handled loosely, just enough to suggest form. He doesn't really chase realism, he lets paint behave like, paint. This piece teaches us how depth isn't just about value, but about texture, knowing when to lay it on, like he does in these little thorn grasses, and when to pull back. Let's see how it looks up close. I wanted to show you this one more piece within the context of brushwork, as it depicts Venice on a grey weather day. It's restrained, tonal, it's all about control. Everything is suggested and not necessarily shown. Those buildings in the background dissolved into soft edges. The palette is very muted and the strokes are minimal, but at the same time precise. There's a certain atmosphere. It's a busy city, but he depicts it as a quiet moment. And then all of a sudden you spot those tiny little figures along the canal. They're not painted, they're placed. It's almost like a single black flick for a body or a head, maybe a shadow underneath, and all of a sudden you've got people. If you look up close, you don't have anything more than just a couple of strokes indicating people. And it's interesting enough, the same for those boats. It's just a blurb of black and brown, and it's very suggestive. And I guess that's Sargent's genius. He knows exactly how much a painting needs to read, and that's it, no more. It's a reminder that expressive brushwork doesn't mean loud or showy. Sometimes it's the quietest stroke that carries the most weight. In a city like New York, everything's in motion. Horns, lights, people passing, it's constant. It can feel overwhelming. And as a painter, that kind of visual noise can make it hard to focus, and let alone find inspiration. But maybe the goal isn't to shut it out. Maybe it's to learn how to see through it. Sargent did just that in this rehearsal of the Pasdeloup Orchestra at the Tuc d'Hiver. Sargent creates order through color. This figure in the foreground with that, I assume, cadmium red dress acts almost like an anchor. He doesn't rely on bright hues beyond the one figure in front and that questionable figure right there on the left. He doesn't rely on bright hues. Instead, he plays with subtle temperature shifts. Warm faces against cool suits, soft ochres against blue grays. He uses warm and cool not just for modeling form, but to control energy. It guides your eyes. This is a very loud painting, not literally, but visually. We would be remiss not talk about color without talking about this painting. Actually, not that one. This one here. A portrait of Edouard and Marie-Louise Pailleron. A striking double portrait that showcases Sargent's subtle use of color temperature to build atmosphere and character. This particular piece really jumps out at you. Maybe it's the color, maybe it's the girl's dress, or maybe the size. This is an enormous piece. It's 60 by 69. That fiery red background really sets the tone and mood of this painting, and it really frames the two children well. If you look at the delicate flesh tones, the warm pinks and soft peaches, they're balanced by cooler shadows around the neck and the cheekbones as I zoom in on the children's faces. This delicate interplay gives the faces a lifelike warmth and depth. Notice the clothing too. The cool grays and blues in Edouard's suit contrasts gently with the warmer, muted tones in Marie-Louise's dress and the soft, beige, warm background. It's a nuanced dance of warm and cool that guides your eyes and adds a quiet elegance. Sargent's color shifts here aren't about bold contrasts, although there is that with regards to the background and the foreground, but more gentle harmonies. They create a sense of calm presence amidst the formal setting. And you see, as I took these snapshots of some of the details of the clothing in the background, a lot of this painting is quote-unquote abstract, whereas a great deal of attention is placed on the children's faces, as you see there. This approach to design, where, as I said, great deal of attention and time is spent on the main subject of the painting, is exemplified really well with this particular painting of the writer Vernon, where Sargent shows us how he uses edges and restraint at the same time. Every one of these brush strokes, as I come in closer to the painting, you'll see every one of these strokes feels intentional and focused, in particularly around the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. That's where all the clarity lives. And this is something you'll find throughout his years of painting, where there's a great deal of attention or energy placed on the main subject. So for all you painters out there, it's a reminder that sometimes detail is more powerful when it's isolated and surrounded by quiet. You see the jacket there, it's entirely blurred into the background. The hair softens. It's nearly abstract. It's not laziness, it's control. You see there with this snapshot. And with this particular painting, look how crisp and defined this face is against the negative space background, which is entirely subdued. From what I gather going through this exhibit, Sargent's use of edges can be, I guess, categorized as mostly all loose and disappearing, with only slight inclinations of hard edges, but they were all whimsical and loose. So for this particular painting, very famous Luxembourg Gardens, Sargent embraces suggestion. If you look at the brushwork in the trees, the distant dresses, the figures, it's a visual murmur. Nothing is pinned down, but the feeling is unmistakable. In this particular painting here, the portrait of Ralph Curtis, it's even more relaxed. The background is nearly abstract. The sand, sky, the sea, it all dissolves into some sort of color washes. Even him lying there, it's extremely loose and painterly. Is blocked in with minimal detail, just enough to place him in the space. I guess this is the hallmark of painterly skills, knowing what to leave out. And in a way, when brushwork serves emotion, looseness becomes clarity. Some of Sargent's most powerful paintings, in my opinion, aren't the ones with grand subjects, but these quiet, unexplained moments like this Venetian interior I'm showing you now. We see these two women walking towards us with another one on the left, sort of in respite. It's a darkened room. The composition is, I guess, in a way voyeuristic. We're witnessing this scene, but we're not intruding. There's no clear story per se, and that's essentially the point. Sargent invites us to feel the stillness and the hush of this space, the slight tension with regards to that mark right on the floor. It's ingenious, really. Light becomes language. You can almost hear the room. This second example of how story and narration can drive mood and energy of a painting is this called the Sulphur match painting, and it's even more cinematic than the first one. It depicts a man who leans almost into this frame, so Sargent crops it quite ingeniously, lighting a match. His face is half lit by the flame, warm and brief. This whole scene feels like you're catching a thought just before it's spoken. The scene feels private or maybe even sacred. I think the takeaway for all of us artists is that mood doesn't require narration. Sometimes mystery is more memorable than clarity, and painting doesn't need to explain itself. It just needs to make you stop and feel. To end our journey, we return to the painting that almost ended Sargent's career. Madame X. At first glance, it's deceptively simple. A woman in profile standing against a brown wall. But if you spend a little bit of time with it, you start to feel the tension that holds it together. It's slightly off-center, stark. There's really no background and limited amount of furniture. No story spelled out, just presence. We artists should be incredibly thankful that we have these sort of studies, if you want to call them, like this one I'm showing you here, which he did of Madame X, that shows the process of him working. If you look closer, the brushwork is incredibly controlled. The face and the hand are refined, but the gown, broad, flat strokes, almost abstract they are. He's mixing precision with suggestion, and it works beautifully. Madame X isn't just a portrait, it's a lesson in holding back. It brings together everything that we've explored in this video. The composition that leads, the brushwork that speaks, color that breathes, and edges that control the mood. Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end. Let me know if you had a chance to visit the exhibit and what you thought of it, or what you think of Sargent's work in general. In closing, if I can leave you with a couple of things. Firstly, if you haven't visited, please go. It's on until August 3rd. And for all of my artists watching here, take the principles we've discussed and implement them in your own work. Don't copy, don't emulate, but instead absorb the lessons, the presence, the restraint, the attention, the clarity. Let them shape how you see. The goal isn't to paint like Sargent, but to paint like yourself. Bye-bye.